meeting to order. This is the August 3rd, 2017 Stormwater Management Committee meeting. And our first order of business is to review our meeting minutes from the last meeting. So has everybody had a chance to review the meeting minutes?
Recommend approval of the meeting minutes of July 6th.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented. Is there a second?
I'll be abstaining since I was not opposed to them.
Okay, all right,
I'll second.
okay. And I'm going to ask those who made the motion and seconded it to accept some friendly edits to their amendment to approve. On page 4, I'll answer to Dobb Galbraith, but it's actually D-O-D-D. so I've answered to that many times, actually, by the way. But and then at the end of that paragraph, it says, there's a quote for me that says, and beyond decisions of the state and the Corps, I think that should be C-O-R-P-S, as in Corps of Engineers rather than C-O-R-E. Just to make that a little clearer. Okay. Is that those edits acceptable to the folks who made the motion? Second? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so we have a properly made motion and a proper second. Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay, all those approved, please notify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, and did that motion include approval of the decision letters?
It did not.
Okay,
It's,
all right.
Was the change you made on the decision letters, or was it on the?
It was on the
minutes.
it was on the minutes.
Okay.
On the minutes
So
on
I'll
page
move to
4.
approve the July 6th decision letters.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Roy Dale to approve the decision letters. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those who approve the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay. All right. Do we have a statement that we want to read before the first case is heard? Okay, the first case, applicants, if you want to come on up and have a seat. And when we get ready to ask you to present your application, we'll let you know after this opening statement.
I'd like to read the opening statement. If you're not satisfied with a decision made by the Stormwater Management Committee, you may appeal the decision by filing for a writ of certiorari with the Davidson County Chancery or Circuit Court. Your appeal must be filed within 60 days of the date that the committee's decision. You are advised to seek the independent advice of legal counsel to ensure that your appeal is filed in a timely manner and that all procedural requirements have been satisfied.
Okay. Okay, you want to...
I'm sorry, I had a point of clarification on the approval of the decision letters. There was one matter on last month's agenda that was a preliminary. Do you have the case number handy, Penny? Which one that was?
Yes, it was Bridgestone, and that was case 2017-00015.
And I believe at last month's meeting, and I'm speaking from memory here, but I think Penny agrees, there was actually not a vote on that preliminary during the meeting. However, having just approved the decision letter that approves it in the form of a resolution, I just wanted the committee members to be conscious that you were effectively, voting now on that preliminary, whereas it wasn't voted on last month. I think not voting on it last month was actually an omission. We just wanted to make sure that you all were making a conscious decision to go ahead and adopt that decision letter today, which I think ratifies it and fixes the omission. But we just want to make sure that y'all were doing that consciously and intentionally.
So the decision letter reflects the discussion that took place at that meeting. It just wasn't properly moved at that time.
Yeah, I think it was discussed. It was discussed as here are the considerations we would like you to take into account. But I believe the way it's characterized in the decision letter is actually an approval with conditions. Is that right, Penny?
That is correct.
Y'all want to take a minute and read?
I think we do, yeah.
That confused me.
Yep. As I read the minutes, and as I recall the discussion, the minutes reflect a variety of comments and a variety of considerations that we gave the applicant that were preliminary in nature, consistent with the preliminary proposal. And the decision letters, as you just stated it, seems to go further than what we discussed. I also distinctly remember, and I think the recording will bear this out, that it's not routine for us to vote on a preliminary. It's more routine for us to provide guidance to the applicant. But we do have the prerogative to vote on an initial reaction to a preliminary proposal. It's just not the final binding decision of the board. Is that correct?
I'm honestly not sure. I believe Ms. Key suggested that it was irregular not to vote on the preliminary. Is that right, Penny?
Well, the minutes state that, the chair stated that it was, that we don't vote on preliminary.
Yeah, that's my memory as well.
Preliminaries, correct. So I don't know.
Is that right, Penny?
Yes, he stated that you all don't usually vote on preliminaries.
Yeah, I remember him saying that, but I'm questioning whether that's actually consistent with the committee's practice.
I thought we'd always voted on everything unless we deferred it. But I guess the point of order would be, even if we approved or disapproved a preliminary, we're not bound by that when somebody comes in with a final plan. Is that correct?
It is just a preliminary.
Yeah, it's just a preliminary. So we would still hear, if they were to return, that case based upon the merits of what they submitted at that time. And even if they did everything we said in the preliminary, that doesn't necessarily mean we'd recommend approval. That's always been my understanding.
I believe that's correct. And so, I believe my understanding is consistent with what Mr. Dale just stated. So I just, we wanted to try to clarify that for y'all in adopting the decision letters and make sure that you were actually okay with it, given the perhaps slightly different take in the letter from what you all discussed at the last meeting.
It's unusual.
Yeah, it's unusual. I'm inclined to think that the safest thing to do, Mr. Dale, would be for you to move that we reconsider the previous motion and then remove that particular decision letter since it's inconsistent with the minutes of the last meeting.
Is that proper motion? Can I do that?
That is a proper motion.
Okay. So I'll make a motion that we reconsider the decision letters and we remove the decision letter in question and vote on the bulk of what's remaining. And then we can discuss this other removed item if we need to. Okay. So that's my motion.
Okay. And I think in order for a motion to be a motion to reconsider to be properly presented, it has to be seconded by someone who voted on the prevailing side. So.
I believe that's correct.
And I will second that motion.
Okay. So motion's been made and properly seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion to reconsider? Okay, seeing none, all those who support the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those who are opposed? Any abstain? One abstention. Okay, motion passes.
So can we discuss this one item, or do we just need to?
Mr. Dale, given the nature of the minutes and the lack of a vote during that discussion, I think we're better off just.
Okay, we're not bound, I guess. We're not bound
Yeah,
to vote. I mean,
yeah.
okay.
So your internal rules and procedures, I do believe that they do require you to adopt something by resolution and send it to the applicant following a meeting. Let me see if I can find that language. So if we're not going to send that particular letter, we may need to adjust the letter and send something.
Is there a time frame in which that has to occur?
30
question.
days, I believe.
Okay, so
30 days from the last meeting,
Yes.
which would be now.
which would be.
Yeah. Hang on just a second. Let me see if I can find the relevant language so that I can read that to you and you can have an accurate
one is it?
understanding.
Which one is it? State Bridge, okay.
Just for the benefit of those in attendance, we're embarking on some new procedures, and so we're learning the ropes of these new procedures. So appreciate your patience while we sort this out.
Okay, it says, at the conclusion of all the evidence in all cases heard at the hearing session, I'm reading from Appendix F, F1.1.5, decision of the committee. At the conclusion of the evidence in all cases heard at the hearing session, the committee shall discuss the cases and render decisions in executive session on that date or defers decisions for no longer than 30 days thereafter. Any action taken by the committee shall be by motion, which shall state the reasons therefore with particularity. All decisions of the committee shall be by resolution, must be in writing, and must indicate the vote of each member of the committee upon the decision, and shall specify in what manner such variation or modification shall be made, the conditions upon which they are made, and the reasons therefore. Unless otherwise stated, every decision of the committee shall be valid for 1 year from the date of the decision, unless a grading permit or building permit is issued within that period, in which case the variance expiration date will run concurrent with the permit expiration date. An order containing the resolution of the committee on each case shall be promptly entered in the minutes of the meeting of the committee by secretary and filed with Metro Water Services. I do think that decision of the committee language that I just read to you was written before we started the process of doing preliminary approvals.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be a little less clear its application to preliminary approvals, which, as Mr. Dale says, are just preliminary. I mean, they're not final binding. They're not actually a grant of a variance.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it really wasn't a decision. We never came to any decision about, all we did was provide feedback to some of their questions and gave them direction. So I don't think there was ever a decision that was made.
And-
To the extent we are kind of looking into the procedures that this committee follows and, trying to get them a little more set in stone, the procedure for preliminaries may be something that you want to consider, like codifying in your internal rules and procedures, just so that we don't have this confusion in future.
Yeah, and I think I may be currently the longest-serving member on the board, and my recollection is that sometimes we vote, sometimes we don't, and that the purpose for a preliminary is intended to give the applicant some expectation of how risky proceeding with investing in a particular proposal might be in consideration of the feedback that the board gives them. And sometimes if we give sort of favorable insight with a full vote, then that gives them more confidence of investing more money in their particular proposal and then coming back with a higher expectation that it might be supported by the board. In other cases, we've we've given very cautious advice to the applicant, and we've said, you're bearing the risk if you go forward. We may not support this, but we can't rule on it now. And in some cases, we've actually told them, this is not something that we'll view favorably, and we might even vote in that regard. But in all those cases, they're always preliminary. It's always up to the applicant to decide what level of risk they want to bear. But I do think what you just said is appropriate. I think as Nashville is growing, as we're beginning to see a lot more scrutiny of this process, we need to scrutinize our procedures and make sure that applicants have a clear expectation of what's expected of them so that they don't take on any unnecessary risk, unnecessary investment in making their cases before the board. So is that a fair summary? All right. So with that, are we okay with proceeding with the first case and not acting in a formal way on the preliminary case that we just reconsidered?
I'll defer to the committee.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yes.
You okay with that, Mr. Dale?
Sounds, she says it's okay, I'm okay.
All right. Thank you. So we're going to move on now. Thank you for your patience. And you want to introduce the first case?
Case number 1 on the agenda is 2017-00011, 42319 Pennington Bend Road. The parcel number is 0620-900-5300. The inspector is yours truly, Kimberly Hayes, and the council district is 15, Jeff Syracuse. The applicant's request is to allow the following: disturbance and encroaching of the 75-foot floodway buffer, both Zone 1 at 50 feet and Zone 2 at 25 feet of the Cumberland River, for construction of a single-family residence on piers with concrete carport and entry stairs underneath, driveway, rooftop AC unit, installation of erosion prevention and sediment control measures, and removal of an existing shed within the floodway. The 100-year base flood elevation is 420.2. The second request is for continuous mowing and maintenance of the buffer. The appellants are Kenneth and Sanoke Kissinger. I do apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly. The representative is Mr. Jason Yost. The comments: Stormwater. The property was purchased October 24, 2014, and signifies that the property was acquired after no disturbed stream buffer provisions went into effect. Stormwater staff does not support the placing of structures fully in the Zone 1 buffer. Codes, no comment provided. Planning, defer to Stormwater for review. Greenways, request the applicant provides a greenways conservation easement paralleling the Cumberland River. There were a few emails in opposition from Travis Lawler of 2315 Pennington Bend Road, from Ms. Victoria May of 2409 Pennington Bend Road, and from Ms. Kim Sorensen of 2627 Miami Avenue. And I do believe Ms. May and the Lawlers are present, and they can expound on that during the comment period.
Okay, so I'm going to turn the chair's position over to our chair, Mr. Slade.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for my tardiness this morning. So I think it's time to turn it over to the applicant, correct?
Hello, my name's Jason Yost, Ingram Civil Engineer. I'm the engineer for the Kissingers. They purchased the property, as Kimberly stated, so that they could build a house on the lot, and they purchased it from out of town, so when they moved here, they weren't aware of the floodway issue. They were actually even shown pictures of the lot next to them, so they were not full disclosure of the property they were buying. So, but they put that to the side and said, okay, well, let's just build. Found out that they were in the buffer, so they've went the proper course to see if they can build a home on the property. We did go before BZA to ask for a 10-foot setback variance so that we could get closer to the road and minimize our disturbance in the buffers. We are not asking for an expanded footprint if we were able to build as per the setbacks per code and stay off of the buffer as we would. Our footprint would be 24 by 40 that we were able to build on, and that is the exact dimensions of the structure that we are proposing to build. So I believe that we are not asking for any out-of-the-ordinary request to build on a property. Our hardship is definitely the flowway buffer and the topography of the site, and we have tried to minimize that by moving it closer to the road because of the setback variance, and that's where we are now. So we're before you to request the variance of the flowway buffer. We recognize that it is not supported by staff, but there have been cases that have been passed and approved in the past, and we believe that we are comparable to those cases. So unless Kenneth or Sinach would like to say anything, I think that kind of summarizes where we are, and we'll send it back to you for questions if you have any.
It's going to open up the meeting to the public then. Is there anybody here from the public has comments? Or if you want to make your way up one at a time to the podium, please, and if you'd state your name.
You want from both sides, for or against?
Yes, either or. So whoever would like to speak.
We have the fours first and then the against. That's normally how it's normally done. So if anybody that wants to speak in favor, speak first.
Since I'm going for
At the microphone. And please state your address, too, if you
Just
don't mind.
name and address, please.
There you go.
Okay, I assure you I'm loud enough. My name's Mary O'Neill. I live at 2219 Pennington Bend Road. And I moved there 2.5 years ago, so I was not there in the flood, even though my home did flood. I'm at a real odd point here because I really value my neighbors on this street, and I know I have neighbors that feel opposite than I do. And so I want to try to keep some sort of friendship within the neighborhood and keep it nice. And our neighborhood is very unusual because it is such a sweet little street amidst a commercial war zone down there. So I really feel like one of the biggest issues for people against this is change. And change is very hard, but if you're in Nashville right now, you better learn to accept change because it's real and it's here. One reason I don't have a problem with them building here is I feel like it will help our property values. The houses down there are totally diverse. I mean, I'm in a row of 5 houses where no house has anything in common. I welcome some increase in property value, not that I ever plan to leave, ever. It is a 100-year flood that we've experienced, so I really am not in fear of this flood. I actually am more in fear of traffic and the compromise of Old Hickory Dam for a decision that was made there to allow drilling. But I feel like right now in building there are flood vents in houses. You raise things up. I don't think that the addition of a few homes on that street is going to change, not nearly as much as a water park that somehow has gotten passed to go in there that has a much more effect. And the other thing is that if so many people on the street have rebuilt since the flood and have asked for these exceptions to be made for them, and it has been allowed. And so I don't know why one person could do it and not another. And my final thing is, if something terrible happened to my house, like another tree fell on it and I had to rebuild, I would want to move my house up. I would want to get out of that buffer and closer to the road. And by allowing someone else to do this, as others have, I don't think my battle will be as hard. I'm not anticipating that at all, but nobody anticipates something happening. So I'm very much in favor of letting them build and, get this variance for them. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Adam Epstein. I live at 3704 Hobbs Road. I own 2 houses on the street at 2207 Pennington Bend Road. Only a few things I want to talk about. First of all, these lots were created in 1925, 92 years ago. The restrictions have been built on the property over the years, so these aren't any restrictions that were self-imposed. They didn't have a choice. What I want to talk about is there's 3 cases that you guys have ruled on over the years. The first one's at 6649 Riverview Drive. These are all similar. They're all on the river, and this one only has 1 exit out. I know that may be an issue for you guys, but on Pennington Bend, we have 3 exits to get out in case of a flood. We have 2 sides of Pennington Bend plus Music Valley Drive are all easy ways to get out. So this one only had 1, and it was approved. The next one is 2828 Sugar Tree Drive. These were all done after the flood. Again, this has 2 exits out. It's on Sugar Tree Creek. The house was in the 100-year flood. The other house was in the 100-year flood. And then the final one is right up the street from here that was granted, which is 2301 Pennington Bend Road. That one, they granted, it was fully in the floodway buffer, and it was the construction of a new house. It wasn't a reconstruction of another house. It was a vacant lot. And what the committee granted at that time was to allow them to move the buffer and improve the buffer and also do uncompensated fill in the floodway and the floodplain. So all 3 of these, and I can hand them out to you guys if you want to read them, and most of you guys remember because a lot of them voted for it that were on the committee at that time. It seems only fair that if we granted it down the street for a similar situation, we should grant it now. And and I know the opponents that are going to speak against it were granted this same exact hardship that these folks are asking for right now. So it seems like it would only be fair to be consistent to go ahead and grant the hardship that they've asked for that they granted just down the street. There hasn't been any real rule changes between 2010 and now when it comes to regulating floodplains and floodways that I know of. It just makes sense that if they haven't changed the rules and they haven't and they're handling all the issues that they need to handle by engineering, they're not increasing the floodplain. They're not increasing. All they're asking for is to improve the buffer in order to build a house there. The folks have moved here from Wisconsin. They're here to retire. They just shouldn't be penalized for what we've already done on the street. They're going to talk a little bit about Metro owning land on the street. Metro currently owns 10 acres on the street of various properties. They didn't offer, when the buyout came, vacant lots weren't offered anything. They only offered homes to be bought out. So they didn't have an opportunity, the owners before that, or to be bought out. So now they're saying, well, we can't build there, so this is basically a taking that they're going to have to go to the city afterwards and try to get compensation because you can't build on the site. And it seems a little unfair to do that to them when it's been granted right up the street. So anyway, those are my issues. I'd wish that with the 10 acres that Metro has, that they would improve the floodplain buffers on the land that they have, and maybe increase the floodplain on the land that they have in order to lessen the floodplain on the other people on the street. Great, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you guys want a copy of these or not?
Sure.
No matter? Okay. Thanks.
Looks like we don't, anybody else for the project? Not seeing any. If anyone would like to come up and speak against, would you like to speak for the project?
I'm really not prepared, believe it. Share. I feel the same way. We've owned
If you
property
could
down there.
state your name and
Oh, I'm
address.
sorry.
Sorry.
Pam Adams and my husband Tony Adams. We have property at 2205 and also 2203 and have had for well over a decade. And I feel the same way. We want to be great neighbors and we're friendly people. We don't want any, we're not conflict about that at all. But we feel like that the city got rid of, I think they bought 25 homes. So I agree that I think change is the main thing that worries people, and the traffic. There's 25 less homes there. There's not a lot you can do about change, in my opinion. I'm very proud of Nashville. I love living here. I just think that, like I say, I'm kind of nervous, I'm not prepared. But when people buy land, and these people bought so in innocence, they didn't know. We're not afraid of the flood either. If we build, it'll be high, and people are following what you need to do to have the flood vents and the height, things like that. And to me, it's very unfair not to be able to utilize what they bought, especially if they're following all the rules and using all the added expense for doing so. It's a beautiful neighborhood. I don't think anybody's wanting to come in and harm anybody. But I don't feel good about taking land away from people that bought it with good intentions or them not being able to utilize it. So, especially when others have all had those exceptions as well. So, I'm not opposed to you coming to the neighborhood, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for the project? Okay. Would anybody else like to speak then against the project?
Yeah, a few of us are here to speak against it. My name's Travis Lawler. I'm at 2315 Pennington Bend, which is right just south of this. And I sent you all a letter. I just have a few comments. I mean, obviously, the people who came up here speaking in favor of it have a vested interest in y'all approving this. Mr. Epstein owns 3 lots at is potentially developing 3 lots at 2317 Pennington Bend. So if y'all approve this, he also needs the same variance for those lots. And I think the point here is not that you should continue to approve these types of variances because you approved them once before, but you should look at the fact that there are more than 40 properties on Pennington Bend and Miami that could be potentially built on with these same variances. And if you do continue to approve these, then you're going to keep getting that same argument. Well, you've approved this before, you have to approve it now, and is that what you really want all those properties developed on a street that just suffered a devastating flood, and where the city spent, $5.8 million on Pennington Bend alone buying out properties. They did not buy out vacant lots because obviously they wanted to make the most of limited buyout money. Instead, these lots there were rules put in place to make these lots essentially unbuildable. They're taxed as unbuildable. And, but for whatever reason now, people are trying to build on them. So I think we've been talking with our councilman who's here today about trying to come up with sort of a more comprehensive solution for the street. Something, maybe some kind of buyout for properties like this, but, and I'm sure he'll talk more about, that, but I think, rather than piecemeal approve, I mean, I don't think anybody wants it. We don't want to keep coming to 40 different hearings on these types of variances. I would like y'all to just set an example at this time and just say that these are not going to be allowed. You can't build in the stormwater buffer, in the floodway buffer. So that's what I'm asking. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Victoria May. I live at 2409 Pennington Bend Road. I am against this variance being granted. And I'd like to speak to what the advocates said first, the full disclosure at purchase. I'm a true believer in doing your own due diligence. My particular lot has a house on one parcel, a second parcel on one side, and a third parcel on the other, are all taxed at $1,500 a year, which has been devalued since the 2010 flood, just as the metro lots were devalued to $1,500 because they were deemed unbuildable. That should have been a hint. It was for me. Did the due diligence, found out these were unbuildable. Still wanted to live there. My grandchildren are literally across the river. They are building a house 24 by 40 feet wide. They are not building it, they're building it horizontal to the road, which is as far forward as you can get. They want to be 20 feet from the road. This road has no shoulders, 2 lanes. It's an old farm road. There's no way to expand that. There's been a lot of talk about past cases being approved. I understand that this board does not consider precedents in granting variances, that each case is considered on its own merits. I don't know about Mr. Epstein's Riverview and Sugar Tree property, but I do have his 2301 plan, and I'd like to pass that around and show you that his house is actually being built between 420 feet and 412 feet. It's just a fluke in the regulations. You've got that up there? You don't have Mr. Epstein's 2 houses. I think they're at 2207. Can you put that up there? He actually is 75 feet from the floodway. However, the way that the computer calculates the floodway, it presumes that the river flows in a straight line like a ribbon. It does not. I can assure you, it does not. It actually flows to the lowest gravity pull possible. And his property actually is from that ribbon of the floodway, 75 feet, but he is still at 412, 414, 416, 418, and 420. So I'd like to submit this. I'd like to copy made and get it back because it's the only copy I have. But,
I'm not sure we have ability to do that for you. Give it back to you today.
tell you what, keep the top one. I'll take the rest of them. The top one is the only one with the ice bars on it. Just tear it off. Thank you. That has the ice bars, which I think are the most important. Also, I offer you these USGS graphs that show where the floodwaters have been in the past. It's startling. You're asked to be fair and consistent. I think being consistent with past rationale on the part of the city is important. And if there was a rationale after 2010 to devalue these properties so they would not be buildable, that's more important than any other consideration. Mr. Epstein talked about using the metro lots, improving them as buffers so that the undeveloped lots could better be built on. The Cumberland Compact, which is a non-confrontational group here in Nashville, has planted many native trees on those metro lots. So they are being used to absorb flood water and any other problem that you might have with flooding as much as possible. Now, FEMA is controlled by 44 CFR Section 60 et sec. And I've studied that, read it over and over again. And I understand that the Metro rules flow from those very minimum standards for building in floodways and flood-prone areas. FEMA is interested in our neck of the woods, meaning all of Nashville, because they granted us a lot of money to buy out, not just on Pennington Bend, but all over the city. And I think they're probably still interested in the fact that we use that money and in looking at, as they are entitled to do on an annual basis, the variants that are granted, the reason those variances are granted. And I've noticed in the news, in doing research, that FEMA has suspended the entitlement for flood insurance in some communities around the nation. They have disqualified communities from this flood insurance. And I remind you that there are many taxpayers that object to the federal government subsidizing this flood insurance. So I hope that you will remember that all of your variances are reviewed by FEMA whenever they so choose, and I know you file an annual report on what you do grant. Now, in reading this 44 CFR Section 60, it talks over and over and over again about human life and safety. Human life and safety. And you do that in your regulations. You've got F1.121A, talks about the danger of materials being swept by floodwaters onto other lands and injury to others. The plan for this house is totally open underneath. We have another house on the road that is built that exact same way. I sent a picture to you of all the things that are stored under that house. Building materials, washing machines, refrigerators. Every one of those is going to become a torpedo in the next flood. And there will be another flood. We just know that. So that hurdle cannot be overcome here. The danger to life and property from flooding. I understand they want to live on the river, but I urge you to protect them from themselves. Don't put 2 more or 4 more or however many more people will be on that river to be saved. Just down the street, 6 houses away, Leslie Bills was in her house during the flood with a friend, could not be rescued. The only way into that part of town was by boat. I'll skip ahead and just remind you that Nashville didn't have enough rescuers. They had to depend on volunteers. Fairview Inn is right at the corner. 300 people had to be rescued from Fairview Inn. Fairfield, perhaps it is. Now, another consideration under F1121K that you consider and that the applicants must overcome is considering the cost of government services. What's it going to cost when this house floods to get the people out, to repair the infrastructure that is damaged? And there is F1.12L3, something about a Greenways Commission. I really don't understand how they fit into this, but there's some consideration there. And then finally, F1124B, you must show no additional threat to public safety or public expense. Over and over again, we're talking about human life and safety, public welfare, and it's not just our street. It's all over Nashville. And personally, I do not want to be disqualified from getting the flood insurance. It's not a right. It's not an entitlement. It is help from the government, and we don't want to lose it, not just on our road, but everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Jeff Syracuse, 15th District. I cannot, in good conscience, support variances of building into the floodway buffer. It's more about sustainable and responsible development. To coin a military phrase, I'm asking you all to hold the line. We don't need to be building into the floodway buffer. When the next flood does happen, it's going to bring us back to the level of damage that we saw back then. The argument was made about change. I'm facilitating more change in Donaldson than it's seen in over a generation. I'm an agent of change. This has absolutely nothing to do with change. This is about, again, just responsible development. The last two speakers made all excellent points, so I'm not going to revisit those. I would like to find a more permanent solution so that we don't have to come back here 40 different times when there's variance requests for the particular properties. So I have been researching that for sure, but I'm asking you to please do not support this variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak?
If there's no one else opposed, I'd like to speak for a minute.
That's fine.
All right. I'm Kenneth Keisinger. This is my wife, Sinach Keisinger. You were really close on the name, Kimberly. But we did move here from Wisconsin and found ourselves, we brought the property sight unseen, as was stated, from a rookie realtor who didn't know how to check all the backgrounds on a property like that. And so we kind of found ourselves in the midst of a much larger political battle than we expected. As you heard, everyone's kind of got their vested interest. So I just want to make sure that Sinach and I are able to cut through all of that and just make this variance process about what we actually came here to talk about, which is to build our house, the house we want to retire in. So I understand there could be 40 more of these variance processes for you, and that does sound pretty terrible, but I think the variance process exists because every case is unique. And if you make a blanket statement that we can't build in the buffer, can't disturb the buffer, period, then I think you're taking away a lot of opportunity from neighborhoods like this in the city. So I just wanted to thank you for your consideration and just let you know that we appreciate it.
Thank you.
And can I add anything or
Sure.
any responses to their comments?
You can.
Okay. So we're not here to set a precedence. There's been 3 cases that I'm aware of that have been approved since the flood, and those have been discussed here. So I don't think 4 cases in 7 years is going to set a precedence. Like Mr. Keisinger said, we're talking about his house. Each case is unique, and as Ms. May discussed or said, the board doesn't act on precedents, so can't really say, well, this is going to set a precedence because, again, the 3 cases have been passed and are approved in the past. The setback variance has been approved, so that shouldn't be in question here. We have a 20-foot setback, whether we're buildable or not. We've been granted that through the proper process. Flood insurance is a private matter, and I would highly doubt that one house being approved in the buffer would disqualify the city for insurance rates from FEMA. The city's taken precautions because of the flood. I think the city was ill-prepared for the flood in the first place as a whole. So because of that, the city's taken precautions as we move forward, and so have we. Elevated the home above the base floor elevation, the louvers for the flood, minimizing the actual obstruction in the flood buffer. We're going to be on columns. There's going to be 8 of them. Each of them are 24 inches in diameter. So if you take that 3 square feet, so it's 28 square feet, that's going to be actually in the buffer. So again, I think that taking everything as a whole and saying, well, we can't develop in the buffer altogether, then we should just do away with the variance process. If we're going to just say, no, you can't do it, then there's really no reason to have a variance process in place that we can come and ask for approval of our matter. So again, thank you, and I'll answer any questions if you have them.
All right, at this time, I'm going to open up to the committee for discussion and questions we may have for the applicant.
I always like starting with facts. Does staff have I know they provided us previously with kind of a matrix of prior board decisions. Do we have any kind of summary of decisions that we've approved and disapproved in locations similar to this, like we've had in, I think, previous discussions over the last 6 months? Not today, okay. I know for me, I take very seriously the burden on property ownership and the risks that are taken on when you are vulnerable to public policies that affect your property value and your investment. And so none of us want to make rash decisions that will either set a bad precedent or that will take away opportunities without proper due process, without a thorough review of the facts. Correct me if I'm wrong, other board members, but in one of the cases we heard previously, I think a case we heard about 3 times before this board, we were provided with a table of prior variances that had been approved, prior variances that had been disapproved, and it illustrated a bit of an unclear direction in terms of board policy by virtue of repeatable board action. And now that's a complicated thing to say because, you know, what was appropriate in 1900 when Nashville was not populated densely versus what's appropriate today, given changing weather patterns, you know, it requires public policy to be updated periodically. And so within those time frames, government representatives make decisions that meet the needs of the time. And so if you look at all those time frames collectively, they look rather inconsistent. But when you look within those time frames with the facts and the conditions they were dealing with, hopefully there's a little more consistency. I'm thinking out loud here, and I'm thinking that maybe we're in a moment here where we have some overlapping time frames and we don't have a clear policy about what we should do. And so what I'm going to suggest to the board is that we step back and review our past decisions in the context of today's environment, and see if we can come up with a clear understanding of what this means, so that we're not coming back as often 40 times in the future without a clear expectation that the public understands is a clear direction of Metro and board policy in regard to these matters, so that people are not incentivized to keep trying to ask for variances that will ultimately either end up getting denied or approved. So I think we owe that to the public. My question to the applicants is can you afford to wait 30 days?
Respectfully, yes. This has been almost a 2-year process, though, so another 30 days is not going to kill us.
Okay.
But yeah, we trust that you'll.
Okay, so that's just my feelings out.
Yeah, I want to ask, I mean, so what are we supposed to accomplish in 30 days?
Well,
I mean, is it a
Well, let me
matrix
just,
of what we've done?
what you'd have to do is, I mean, what you'd have to do is, if you're going to a motion on the table to defer them, but I mean, no one's had an opportunity
Yeah,
to talk.
y'all want to understand what we're talking about.
So if you want to do that in a minute, then
Okay.
then you can support, give the reasons why you think that would be helpful, but.
That's
let's go
why
on.
I'm not
Okay,
making a motion.
I'm just going to talk separately about just my thoughts. Because we continually talk about these types of variances on Pennington Bend as one road that this has come up multiple times. And based upon this testimony, and I'm not sure exactly how many homes Metro bought, someone said 25. Are there 25 structures on Pennington Bend that have been purchased? Yes. And so if I look at that, I'm thinking, okay, now there's 25 homes that will be removed, and that's 25 more lots that will never be built on, and that's a lot of open space that's been added, and that's pretty awesome. But on the other hand, Metro doesn't buy vacant property. Unfortunately, it'd be nice if they did. I mean, Metro Parks paid millions and millions and millions of dollars for Mo Lidle's property for a public park. Why can't Metro Parks come and try to buy some of these isolated parcels? They could do that, but they simply don't do that. And as a result of that, we're faced with situations where people buy properties. They are legal parcels. They pay tax, and they have a right to request a variance. And I think if there's a hardship indicated, I think that this committee needs to look at that. So I know we've granted variances before on Pennington Bend, and we haven't. There is some inconsistency there. So I understand what Dodd's saying here, and maybe we can look at that. Maybe that helps us. But yet, from my perspective, we look at these all independent anyway. I'm not sure that I'm swayed by what we've done in the past. I think I'm going to look at what the proposal is and the request that's being asked and the mitigation that's being proposed. I wish there was an easy way to deal with these. I wish Metro would buy these parcels, but they're not. And so we'll be continuing to look at this. I think that your request is reasonable, quite honestly. A lot of the discussions about what happens in a flood is going to happen within a flood on adjacent properties that are developed today. I'm very familiar with this community. As a former council member here, I know nobody wants to create turmoil within the group of people that live on the river there. And so people have certainly a right to speak in support and opposition, but hopefully it doesn't go beyond that. We'll all want it to be good neighbors. So those are my comments. I'd like to listen to what anybody else has to say.
Yeah, discussion's open.
Following Dodd, I think, is that the properties I've only been on for a little over a year. So, in my history, we have not approved anything in Pennington Bend, and we haven't approved any building in a Zone 1 buffer. So, if there's been some inconsistencies, it's been before me, so I would kind of like that background information to know why those decisions were made, and, if there's something I'm missing, that why we've changed our stance, if we've changed our stance. So for me, it would be helpful to have more information before we proceed with this decision in this case.
From my memory, the ones we denied, the 2 lots we denied earlier this year, were the first time this committee's ever denied complete development on a property.
That's my recollection, too.
It's the only time that I'm aware of, and that's consistent with everything that's been brought to us. If that's helpful. But
And that's my point. I mean, I think the one thing that might be universally agreed to is that the public perceives some inconsistency in recent past by that fact. And I don't think it's wise for a public policy board like this to proceed on a decision until that can be sorted out. And there's got to be a reason why we've shifted at least once. And in any other case, Mr. Dale, I would be much more comfortable with a case-by-case analysis. But one of the reasons why we voted to deny the previous case that we're talking about was because of the trend of Metro policy in that kind of policy environment and in this kind of development environment, the public deserves to have a clear expectation of metro policy and board policy. And I think this is one of those unusual cases where it would be wise for us to step back and think more as policy makers by virtue of our board decisions than individual case decision makers, and just let policy be defined by this kind of inconsistent pattern of individual cases. I think the public deserves a better expectation of that. That's pretty central to Supreme Court land use case law, that the public deserves prior expectation for their investment risk. And I think that's a reasonable approach.
Has there been a motion? Have you made a motion yet?
I wanted to hear the discussion before I made a motion.
I mean, we can discuss those other projects, but if we go through this period of 30 days, then I think all that'll be presented clearly to us. But as I recall, maybe some of the ones that, or maybe the one that were talked about that we disapproved, the building that was being proposed was so narrow, it was almost ridiculous. That there was not any reasonable buildable area, and the proposed building was going to be so tiny. And in this lot, I think you can get a reasonable footprint. So, but it'd be interesting to see just exactly what we did. And so I think I would support a motion, if someone makes one, to wait 30 days and let's just look at what we've done in the past.
Okay, so given that, in order to be timely and move forward, I'm going to move that we defer this current proposal with the following conditions. That staff put together a summary of past board decisions, and that summary include enough detail to help us understand the attributes of those cases and the collective meaning from a policy perspective of those cases that we ruled on. And that I'd also like to ask our Metro Water leadership, the managers, to advise us about FEMA implications. And I think we've already pretty thoroughly reviewed opportunities for Metro to purchase property. We've gotten testimony from Metro staff in the past that there is no current policy or program that's actively buying vacant parcels. So I'm not sure we need to ride that horse again. So if that's my motion.
If we could hold up one second. Legally, procedurally, do we make a motion to defer, or do they ask for a deferral and then we grant that?
The motion to defer can come from the committee, but it can't be for longer than 30 days.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure.
Let me ask to clarify Dodd's motion. So we're going to be reviewing similar projects where where variances were approved for structures within the floodway buffer, right?
Or disapproved.
Or disapproved.
Both, and particularly in these frequently flooded locations on the Cumberland River specifically. And I can envision staff giving us a 15, 20-minute presentation kind of summarizing all of that so that we can properly understand what these past board decisions mean. I always look at Michael when I think out loud about things like that.
Just to address that, so to be clear, if we do
Come up to the mic.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So if we set up this opportunity for review, we can certainly do the research, but in terms of holding discussions, does that need to be announced? I will need some guidance on how to proceed in a public forum for such.
Yeah, I think that maybe we could just, for public notice purposes, for open meetings compliance, maybe make sure that the agenda that's issued for the meeting, maybe in addition to restating the case for 2319 Pennington Bend Road, you might just kind of add a little bullet point or something explaining that the requested staff presentation on these issues will be anticipated also in that context.
Okay, is there a 10-day notice requirement for such?
So the Open Meetings Act doesn't have a specific, like, date or period of days preceding a meeting that's clearly defined as, compliant with that. I think generally 10 days is certainly a reasonable period. The statute itself just says like adequate notice or something like that, something nice and vague in general. But yes, I think 10 days would be adequate.
Okay, Mr. Chair, does the committee have a preference if we are indicating a 30-day period?
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
no.
I forgot something. The internal operating rules and procedures do specify that the agenda must be provided to the committee members at least a week before the meeting.
Okay, so having all this information, knowing that in 30 days, we're compelled to issue a decision, right, that the committee is, based on the deferment, correct? That from today, 30?
Yes.
Okay, so backing off of that, would you like staff, then we'll certainly do the research, and then we can offer a time and date for a convening to discuss or for staff to present, sensitive to the timeframes that have been described by legal counsel.
I think we'd probably want to do it at the next meeting, and we would just have the presentation before. We'll go out a little bit out of order, and we'll have the presentation before the first. This will be the first matter on the agenda, I would think. So we'll
Yes, if there's going to be committee discussion, it would have to be an open meeting.
Sure. Okay, so you want to do it at the next meeting?
And we'll just do it before the first hearing, which I would expect to be this one.
Yeah.
If the motion
That means
passes.
y'all have to come back,
Okay.
if that's okay.
And the motion will still needs to pass. But
Understood.
That's the proposal.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, so we have a motion without a second, basically, Mr. Chair.
I'll second the motion.
I'd like to just state, I understand what you're suggesting. I think that I disagree that this is a policy board. I don't think that is our role. We are supposed to take policy that's put into place by the people that are elected by the county and then appointed and serve in certain executive roles, administrative roles. And we're supposed to just hear case by case based on that policy. And I think it is clear in the manuals and those things that are given to us that if there's a hardship on the property, then we're supposed to consider a variance. And I'm a little, I have a little bit of an advantage in that I've been on the board a little longer. We certainly have a new member who doesn't have that advantage. So I do see some benefit to going through those decisions. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference personally because we did that in depth 3 months ago. But that's my comment. I want to add to it. I think that decisions of any metro board or commission is going to vary through time based upon the people that sit on the board. And I don't think that constitutes a change in philosophy or policy. It's just, it's the makeup of the board itself. And so I think it's fine to go through this and look at all these. I think that may be helpful, but I think that everything should be looked individually, however, based upon its merits.
Yeah, and I'm working really hard to think fairly about this. I'm much more inclined to vote today the way Mr. Slade said we voted in the past. I just hear the public saying they don't understand the decisions we're making. And I think if we can solidify that individual cases do tweak the way we look at these decisions in different ways, case by case, if we could clarify why that's the case, or if we could clarify why it's clearly obvious that intrusion into Zone 1, intrusion into a floodway buffer is just not something we routinely approve, then we need to solidify that. And I think maybe this is the first time we've also had the chance to to have these kind of discussions televised so that a broader audience can understand how we make these decisions and why we're making them. And I do agree we're not policy decision makers, but I do think we create policy by virtue of our decisions through the pattern of our decisions. So I do agree with Mr. Slade. We're not authorized to be policymakers. But I also just want to be very, very sensitive to property rights and trends in our decisions.
Any other comments on the motions on the table?
Can staff, Mr. Chair, ask a question or a point of clarification?
Sure.
Might be helpful for Penny and Mr. Balthrop if there maybe could be a little bit more specifics regarding what time frame you're looking for the review to be over, the degree of inclusion maybe into the buffer, so it would assist them as they're looking at this search. I would like to offer, as someone who's been involved with these cases for many years, I think Slade is correct that when you lay them all out on the table, they're all going to be very different. They're going to involve differing amounts of intrusion into the Zone 1 and or Zone 2. And I think it's always on a case-by-case basis going to fall back to hardship. So I think we're more than willing to do the research. Obviously, buffer regulations are very varied, if you would. The buffers exist in any number of different places, in any number of different circumstances. So the variance process on these are much more important than maybe some of our other regs, because the buffer regulations, while very necessary and very important, can't consider every conceivable circumstance that there are on properties like this, where, for instance, the Zone 1 includes the majority of the property. So I think that's where it bumps over into what is the hardship on this particular case. So anyway, I think that would be helpful for staff. I just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
Do we do like residential structures along the Cumberland River after the 2010 flood? I mean, does that narrow it down a little bit? And maybe you can just give a list of variances that were approved versus variances that were disapproved. I don't know, you don't want to go through them all in detail. What else, Don? I mean,
well, the table that was provided was pretty helpful. So that to me is first base. I think the only other thing that would help was how this case is different or similar from those previous decisions since 2010, and maybe a little explanation about hardship for each case. You know, what was the hardship? Why did we? What was the hardship in regard to cases that we approved?
I want to make sure that the three variances that were discussed by the public and brought to me would be on the list too.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Outside of it, just on the river, I'm thinking, obviously that is a very limited number. It should be not difficult to do based on what we've heard over the past 6 months, but
I think we need to narrow it down. Otherwise, staff is going to be working a lot, because we've granted lots of variances over the years. So if we can narrow it down to maybe the Cumberland River, residential structures, where requests were made within the buffers, that would probably narrow it down better for you.
should we try to go any wider? That's what I'm wondering, whether or not
Any what, wider?
cast that net a little bit wider.
I don't know.
Is it possible to even go to like large tributaries?
It could be, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I just don't want to overburden them.
That's what
I don't
I'm
know how many cases this would be.
I don't know.
For some reason, it's my perception that, there's two things going on here. Is that waterfront property with lots of water is attracting new interest for development and sales of property. And it's also the places where the flood risk is much higher than of the tributaries. So I'm okay with limiting it to the.
I think our staff knows what we're looking for. I think they're very articulate and knowledgeable, and I think they can come up with a good example, a good sample of what we're looking for. So the burden's on you, Michael.
Any other comment, discussion?
I'd like to call for the question, Mr.
There's
Chair.
a motion on the table to defer this to the next meeting with the understanding that staff's going to present some information to us before that hearing. And there's been a second, so let's take a vote. All the yeas.
Aye.
Is that 3 or 4?
For a show of hands, if you're not sure.
Okay. Well, that's 5-4. I'll vote against. There it is. So we'll see you in 30 days. Thank you very much. You don't want to do that, trust me.
I was told that.
I'm not sure that's a compliment. Someone tells you you should have been a lawyer. Ready for the second matter, if we could have the reviewer read into the, or actually, were both of you here when we read the statement in the beginning? Okay. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Case number 2 is 2017-00019 for 3846 Cross Creek Road. The stand part is 117-1400100. The inspector is myself, Kimberly Hayes. This is Council District 25, Russ Pulley. The applicant's request is to allow the following. Number 1, disturbance of the 75-foot floodway buffer, 50-foot Zone 1 and 25-foot Zone 2 of Sugar Tree Creek for removal of existing driveway from Zone 1. Removal of existing residents, driveway, and related items from Zone 2, and construction encroachment of new residents and driveway in Zone 2. Waiver of buffer signage requirement and signs on the no-mow line. Continuance mowing and maintenance of the buffer area. The appellant is Rockford Construction Company, Incorporated. The representative is Mr. Walter Davison. Comments, Stormwater staff. The property was purchased on May 11, 2015, and signifies that property was acquired after no disturbed stream buffer provisions went into effect. A previous stormwater variance, 2015-00016, expired on November 5, 2016. Condition number 6 of the variance was not met, where a building permit was not issued for the variance to run concurrent with the current expiration date. Changes have been made to the elevation of the proposed structure to achieve balanced cut and fill. Over 2,100 square feet of impervious area from the former driveway has been removed from the Zone 1 buffer. A 25-foot no-mow buffer from the floodway is proposed. If approved, it is suggested that the limits of disturbance do not encroach into the floodway and the silt fence be installed along the requested 25-foot no-mow buffer boundary. Codes, no comment provided. Planning defers to stormwater for review, and greenways defers to stormwater staff comments.
Thank you. Is there anyone from the public to speak for or against the project? Seeing none, we'll open it up to the applicant.
Hello, my name's Walter Davidson. I'm the engineer representing Rochford Construction Company. The proposed plan that's being brought before you today is basically the same plan that was approved in 2016. The reason we did not proceed to get a building permit at that time was we had to also get a variance from Board of Zoning Appeals for the setbacks, and they sent it to the Planning Commission, and they realized there was some setbacks on the plat that had to be amended, requiring the signatures of all nearby owners, one of whom was out of state. It took a while to track it down. But we do have the Board of Zoning Appeals approval at this time. As stated, we are in the demolition of the old house that had been heavily damaged by flooding. We have removed the old house and the driveway and are offering a whole lot less disturbance of the buffer. The variance for the signs is not a variance to eliminate the signs, but to move them to the 25-foot no mow buffer. And we would request approval.
Thank you. Open up to the committee for discussion. Questions for the applicant?
I guess I'm a little confused. Did the variance expire, or is that,
Yeah.
that's totally why you're here, just because your variance expired? Okay. Nothing's changed from
Nothing's
before?
We did have to make a slight adjustment to the floodway because of the changing from the 2013 preliminary maps to the 2017 final.
Okay. Did that effectively change anything significant? Okay. All right, thank you.
Roy, I would like to add, in the previous variance, they had requested uncompensated fill, which was not approved, but they have adjusted the elevation for the garage on the current structure, so they wouldn't have to request any uncompensated fill.
So prior, we did not approve the variance for uncompensated fill? Okay. And they're not requesting it today?
No.
All right.
And what's the condition that wasn't met, number 6?
Number 6, which states that if you pull a building permit, that building permit will run concurrent with the variance, and the variance will run concurrent with the building permit.
Is the approval letter from the last granting of a variance included in our packet? Let's start doing that. Make sure we always include if there's a past variance that's associated with it. Thank you.
And I don't guess we've got any record of the minutes of that previous discussion.
Yeah, minutes from whenever we're hearing a matter that's been heard before, let's make sure we have all the letters and minutes that were associated with that particular meeting. Okay. Thank you. I'll go ahead and make a Dodd, you were going to say something?
I don't know that it will matter because I'm trying to remember how I voted on the first time. We have a photograph of the site from road level. Seems like I remember this lot being below the elevation
Yes.
of the road. Okay,
It
it's
is
lower
below
than.
the
Okay, then I think I
elevation.
remember how I voted now. I'll leave it up to other board members to discuss it. I don't think I'll support this primarily because it's I'm just not comfortable supporting development on lots that are below road elevation. I think civil engineers build roads at a higher elevation for a very good reason. I always advise my friends, never buy a house or a lot that's below grade of a road, an adjacent road, because that's an indication you're vulnerable to flooding, or vulnerable to something, or they wouldn't have elevated the road to start with. And, that's all I've got to say.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to approve as submitted. Based on the fact that obviously there's a hardship on the property, and this development will be an improvement, especially considering the impervious area behind the house that's being taken away. I'm very familiar with this property. When I was an engineer, I was actually in the backyard trying to figure out how to fix their flooding problems years and years ago. So I remember when this one came before. And as I recall, that is why it got approved, that this was an improvement to the existing condition. And so that's my motion.
And I'll second the motion and also add to it. I mean, the applicant has proceeded to do, I guess you've demolished, or you've proceeded
Yes,
along
he did
the lines of.
obtain a demolition permit and removed the old house.
Right. So in good faith, you've proceeded in the right direction. It's just unfortunately the variance expired before you could get your permits, I guess. So I think that's also significant as well. So I second your motion.
And it does help that there's a house there previously. So we've tended to honor that. It's just I'm personally not comfortable with supporting it. So.
Any other discussion regarding the motion? Let's take a vote then. All those. She's got somewhere to be. All right, let's take the vote. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Aye. All those against?
I'm a vote no.
5-1. Mr. Galbraith is the against.
Mostly because I can't remember how I voted. So.
Motion's granted. Variance is granted. Thank you very much. I guess now we're into the new business portion of the meeting. I'll start off with again apologizing for my tardiness this morning. Thank you.
First meeting.
I know. Thank you so much for stepping up to the plate and taking over all the hard difficulties.
That is no problem.
Had I known it was going to be this way, I would have missed the first variance too.
We just proved I've got your back. That's all it proves.
So what is on our new business? We don't have any.
I've got one point of order, just clarification.
Hold on one second. We had spoken about whether or not the Loft Hotel owner was going to come today and talk. He decided against that.
Yes, and we have scheduled a meeting with he and his representatives in the coming 2 weeks to see what further we can do to assist them.
Okay. Just so that the rest of the committee knows, he was not able to come together with staff in order to get something together for us to vote on in time, and he wasn't happy about the fact that he wasn't going to be heard, and so that's what's going on there. So, thank you.
I have a question. I received a letter from the public about some water bill. Did you all receive that? Do we need to do something with that? I mean, it doesn't seem to be under this purview here, but.
I believe we were all just copied.
Okay.
And because of that,
That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
So it looks like we don't have any new items. Yes.
All right, I've got one procedural point of order, and this will get you up to date with what we did while you were getting here. We passed a motion to reconsider approval of the decision letters. What I don't remember is, did we pass a motion to approve the decision letters less the decision letter that we removed? Or did that motion cover everything in the way it was
I
worded.
believe that the motion was just to remove that one letter from the
Was that your
set
motion?
of
Okay. I
decision
just wanna make
letters
sure we
that
didn't get
was
out of here with that.
already approved. Everybody's nodding, so everybody seems
Okay.
to have had the same
Okay.
understanding that I did.
Because normally a motion to reconsider it is an individual motion.
It would just
and then it
rescind the
requires another
entire motion, you're right.
But Mr. Dale was efficient, and I thank him for that.
Mr. Chairman, staff has one point, if we have time.
Sure.
Wanted to touch base. I know one of the things that staff has tried to do more so in the last few months is to provide better staff comments to relate the particulars regarding cases, and just wanted to, ask if there is feedback over time regarding the comments that we give, and also maybe clarify some of the things that we do say. For instance, staff does not support whole structures in Zone 1 of the buffer. That is a general technical comment relating to when buffers do good. It wouldn't necessarily be relating to any one parcel, but any river anywhere. But the one thing in talking about it and wanting to make sure is that in no way circumvents staff's expectations or anything else relating to whether hardships apply. So there's technical information that we provide as background, but always the hardship element, we are fully aware that lies with the committee and looking at each respective case. So we hope these comments are, sometimes they're difficult to come to as far as not sending unanticipated or unintended rather messages, but we continue to be open to feedback from the committee, but just wanted to clarify that obviously hardships are as determined by the committee regardless of the technical aspects of these differing cases.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the comment. I mean, I think the staff's recommendations have been better, and I think it's also going to help that we're going to start having the reviewer review, because that gives staff an opportunity to actually explain what the recommendation is.
One of the things.
But I agree with you. The hardship is purely in our.
But I mean, it is unusual if someone's requesting a variance and their whole variance is basically in the Zone 1 buffer. I'm not sure why staff would say we don't. I'm not sure why you would even take a position.
Well, and I think that's the kind of feedback we need. I mean, if you're assuming we're against that, and that's the thing.
I think that would be the public's assumption. I think if the public looked at the staff comments and it said the staff doesn't support Zone 1 buffer, then a disturbance, and I think that's a message to us. And I'm not sure that that's something you should say.
Because when we talk internally as staff, theoretically, since we're charged with enforcing the regs, we're technically against every variance request.
Exactly.
Not to be overly negative, but that's kind of the world.
It has to be an appeal from the staff decision, so they have to have made a negative decision in order for there to be.
That's the world we live in. So that's the kind of feedback that I think is helpful to us. One of the unintended things that we're dealing with, and we're trying to make this clear to folks we meet with, is the comments that we make in no way should be perceived as we are approving or disapproving a variance. I think sometimes, given how things play out, some folks come to think that by our comments, we're approving or disapproving, and that's certainly not our intent whatsoever. So we're trying to think more in those terms and just try to communicate the technical and logistical specifics of when people are working with our staff and with Penny and with Development Services staff on these. So please continue to get us feedback how we can help you better as you're considering these, and we'll certainly do everything we can to accommodate you.
Thank you. Should the comments not be recommendations for approval, support? Should they be more of a, we believe this particular mitigation is reasonable in light of the hardship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, is that how they should be worded?
I mean, the latter characterization that you just gave, in terms of looking at the mitigation in comparison to the hardship, there's a certain amount of non-delegable authority that the committee has, and the kind of discretion that you exercise to grant or not grant a variance, well, it's not absolute because it can't be arbitrary. You do have to have reasons for your decisions, and both the code and the rules specifically say that you have to articulate particular reasons for your decision. You can't allow staff's judgment to be substituted for your own, because you all are making the decision whether or not to grant the variance. So in that sense, if everything that the committee did was just a kind of a rubber stamp of a staff recommendation, that would be improper. That would be the delegation of non-delegable authority. So I certainly understand what Michael is saying, like that they are not really taking a policy position on the variance, but are making sure that you all have the technical information to make an informed decision, which I think is very appropriate, but the ultimate discretion does rest with the committee on granting or not granting the variance. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it adds color to it. I'm just wondering whether or not that they should actually use the word support or recommend at all with respect to comments they make, because I think they raise a good point. You're against all. That's why we're here. We're here.
I
So
think typically they haven't. I don't remember any cases where they've.
I don't think they do in the writing, but I
Yeah.
think at the end, during the discussion, oftentimes we look to them and ask them if they support.
And we would be comfortable with that not happening.
And we're not
Very
supposed to do that. I
comfortable.
Yeah. Generally, what I'm looking for are facts and technical insights and procedural understandings, particularly as it relates to mitigation. I mean, ultimately, I think it should be our prerogative to delegate, if we have to delegate, technical judgments in regard to mitigation. I just don't think collectively we're the best judge of scientific, metric for metric mitigation justifications. I think staff should have that prerogative. But, and that's just my humble opinion. The rest of it is, I'm just trying to understand, like in the case of the first case we heard today, what does this decision mean in light of previous cases? It was really helpful that I think, I can't remember who it was who brought that table of past decisions. Maybe it was our previous technical secretary who put that together. But that was really helpful in just kind of helping us understand the trend of our decisions and where that was going. And I know we've debated in the past about whether or not this staff should give us input the way planning staff gives the planning commission and the way other regulatory staffs. Typically, they take positions. The historic commission staff, I think, takes positions. I'm more concerned when they see a big red flag and what they just feel like is just a clear, obvious, inconsistent proposal. And I definitely want to know that. I'm not as concerned with knowing that they take a position on every single case. But on the other end of the spectrum, I always want to know, if they feel like this is an easy variance, a no-brainer kind of variance. So I like for staff to tell me the extremes and then just kind of give me facts about the middle, if that makes sense.
So I think the staff can give comparative type information to past variances.
I think that's fine.
Yeah, and so I think that's probably what we're looking at.
Yeah.
That and then technical responses on mitigation.
Yeah. And in regard to hardship, if you just relate what's in the minutes, you won't be taking away our prerogative in that regard either.
I mean, hardship also has somewhat of a legal definition. It's sort of nebulous because it's kind of case law formed rather than like codified. But, I mean, we can always talk about that too. And some of the considerations that were discussed in some of the earlier presentations and that come up from time to time, they talk about the kind of the innocence or, of the bona fide purchaser coming to the property. I don't think that is included in the definition of a hardship. Really, the case law talks about the physical characteristics of the property and that it should be unique, and it shouldn't be some typical physical characteristic of the property that's shared by all the surrounding properties as well. That's really the kind of thing, and it shouldn't be a purely pecuniary evaluation either. So that's really the kind of
That's
thing that
exactly the
case law-
question I was going to ask you. Like, I assume you probably represent the Board of Zoning Appeals, or, you know.
I don't personally, but
Okay, but
yes.
you know, so if someone comes for hardship and they have bad topography, all the conditions that would grant a hardship, yet maybe a board member says, well, when did you buy the property? And they're like, well, I bought it last year. Have there been cases that have been disapproved based upon when someone purchased a property and then have appealed that and a court say you can't consider that? I mean, has that ever come up?
In the BZA context,
Yeah, I mean, but would that be I mean, we are supposed to be basing it upon the property itself, not when someone purchased their property, right?
Correct,
Yeah.
absolutely. The hardship is unique to the property, it kind of runs with the property. And that's one of the reasons you're supposed to think about it that way, is because the property may change hands in the future.
Exactly.
And if you've allowed, or they actually say that the variance runs with the construction sometimes too, because, you know, if you granted it to one property owner because of some unique vulnerable circumstance that they had, you know, and then they sell it to somebody else 5 minutes later, you know, that doesn't transfer. So it's not the people and their circumstances that are something you should take into consideration in determining whether there's a hardship. And the wording actually says exceptional hardship. So, I mean, it really is, all the case law talks about the physical characteristics of the property.
And not when the property was purchased.
And so in essence, a person could buy the hardship when buying a parcel.
I mean, what's built there is there, you know, once the variance is granted. So, you know, it'll transfer, the improvement will transfer hands with the property.
And, you know, I've seen varying degrees of applicants' understanding and descriptions of hardship articulated in their application in the past. And one of the things that I thought would help the committee, and maybe this is a discussion for kind of these procedural matters that we need to update, but I think one thing that would help the applicant and help us is to have them follow a hardship outline and only state the hardships that are allowable under the regulations. Because
It's not codified in the regulations. The regulations just say the phrase exceptional hardship, period. It's not defined in there.
So you're defining it based on
I'm defining it based
BZA?
on, case law that has developed not just in Tennessee, but around the country. And there is some variation, but you know, what we see most consistently is that what you're supposed to be looking at is the physical characteristics of the property itself.
Now that behavior makes sense.
Motion to adjourn? It's been a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's anonymous.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.